If you've ever knit with a cable needle, then you already know what a lifeline is. A lifeline is simply a piece of string or other yarn or thread that you put through the loops of your knitting, and then you continue to knit, leaving that thread in place. This saves your loops of your knitting on that row, so that if you have an accident up here somewhere and you need to rip out the rows, you can go back to that line, that string or thread, and that will hold your loops on that row, and you can start over from there instead of having to go all the way back. There are several ways to do lifelines. One of the easiest ways is with the Knit Picks needles that are interchangeable. They have this little hole in them. See if you can see that, the little hole. And that's where you put the pin to change the needles. What I do with my Knit Picks is I take and thread my lifeline, which in this case is crochet thread. I thread it into my working needle, into that hole, and then I just knit my row as normal. Okay, one thing you have to be careful of if you're using the method where you put the thread through the hole in your interchangeable needles is that your thread doesn't come out of the hole when you slide the stitches over the thread. So I've got all my stitches knitted, and I'm just going to slide them over that thread onto the cable, just like I would normally do, basically just ignoring that the thread's even there. Like that. Once I do that, I can take the thread out of the hole on the other side. And there's my lifeline. It's been thread through all the holes, it's been thread through all the stitches that I just knit. It's good to use a contrasting color when you do this, to your contrasting to your yarn, so that you can see it. And it's also a good idea to make your lifeline a lot longer than your row is, so that when you stretch your row out like this, your lifeline won't run back into the row and you'll lose your lifeline. It's okay if it bunches up like that, because you really just need it in there to hold those stitches in place. So then you just ignore the lifeline completely, and you work back the other way, and you just keep going, and that line will stay on that row just in case you need it. Okay, so now that we've figured out how to put in a lifeline, how do we use a lifeline? You can see my lifeline there. I've knit a few more rows so you can actually see it. It stays in place. And to use it, let's say I made a mistake up in here. All you do is take out your needles. And if you've never done this before, I suggest that you make a washcloth using big fat cotton thread and try it. Then it won't be so scary when you do it on lace weight thread or yarn. Okay, so I took the needles out, and I want to pull the yarn out, keep going, okay. Now I'm down to the row where my lifeline is. All you need to do to use a lifeline is to take your needle and go everywhere the thread is. Just follow the path of the thread. Okay? It goes in this loop and comes out the back of it. So that's what I want to do. I want to follow the path of the thread through every single loop that it goes through. Now this is pretty easy to see right now because I'm doing it on knit stitches, but it can get real hairy if you're doing it on lace. So just remember to follow that thread. Now if you don't have a cable needle, or if you don't have an interchangeable cable needle, if you're just working with a regular cable needle, a fixed needle, you'll want to do a lifeline in a different way. You don't have that hole to thread it through. So what I do is I take my line, in this case it's crochet thread again, and I take some Scotch tape. Take a little piece of Scotch tape, and somewhere down on the needle, not at the point, if you can see that or not, tape that down. You don't want to use a lot of Scotch tape because it'll be impossible to get off your needle. But I basically just attach it to that needle, to my working needle. And then I knit my row as usual. Okay, once I've knit that, with the line on there, you can see it right there wrapped around my needle a little bit. I'm going to pull all the stitches past the tape. Then I want to pull the thread off the tape. Get the tape off my needle, of course. And you can see the lifeline right there. See how it's thinner. And same procedure with the other one. You want to knit back and just keep on going, and that line will stay in place. And then when you're finished with your piece, you can remove it by just pulling it out. Couple of hints here. The reason I'm using a white thread here on white yarn is because thread sometimes bleeds color, and so I normally would use a contrasting color, except when I'm using a white or a really light colored yarn. Then I want to use a white or a beige thread, or even dental floss or something like that, because I really don't want a little red stripe in here from my thread that I was using as a lifeline. One other tip is I don't put beads or knots or anything in the ends of my lifelines. I make them really long and leave them hanging out. I have found that if I tie a knot in it or I put a bead in it, then it works its way back to the knitting and sometimes gets caught in it. So I don't like to do that. I just make it really long and let it just hang out the edges there. And that's about it. That's how you do a lifeline. And if you ever have to rip back, you'll be glad you put one in. The frequency of putting them in is up to you. Put them in and make a note somewhere of what row you put it in on, because you don't really want to have to rip back and try to figure out what row that lifeline is on. Better just to make a note of it.